Honorary member. Hey, Matt. And then you guys will come up. All right. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the lunch. We'll be kicking off the second part of today's conference with our keynote. I'm honored and thrilled to be introducing Director Lauren Boyd, who currently serves as the Director of the United States Department of Energy's Geothermal Technologies Office. Lauren has had an incredible career at the US DOE since 2009. She has been instrumental in helping scale up next-gen geothermal technologies, whether through coordinating with our national labs or working through international steering committees. Most notably and most recently, she was essential to developing the Forge project in Utah, as well as the DOE's EGS Earthshot, which of course sought to reduce the technology curves for EGS. It's difficult to understate the positive impact she has had on this exciting and important sector. Without further ado, Lauren, welcome to the Carnegie Endowment to International Peace. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I normally hate intros, but that was like the kindest intro ever. Thank you for that. I'm so excited to be here. I am just deeply pleased to hear about the interests and see so many people here to talk about geothermal energy, and to tell you a little bit about what we're doing within the Geothermal Technologies Office, which is basically the research arm of the DOE for geothermal energy right now. We're focused on RD&D across the spectrum of geothermal technologies. I'm focusing mostly on power today, based on the theme of this meeting. Can you hear me okay? Is the sound all right? It's a little low. Okay, put it over here. Cool. So I always like to start with why geothermal matters, and I know you've been here all day and you've been talking about this, so you're probably here for the reasons that I'm about to talk about. But with energy demand rising on the order of 700 to 900 gigawatts, that's probably an outdated figure at this point. We have a significant need for energy, for firm, clean energy. We have a really rising demand globally for heating and cooling, and for heating based on how much energy we use in our homes in the United States on space heating, how much money, $300-something billion a year just for building energy costs. And then finally, the growing demand for lithium, which IEA projects to be over 500% increase in the next by 2050. So there's a really significant energy challenge ahead of us that geothermal can provide a lot of really creative and I think elegant solutions for. And so my office within DOE is focused on trying to establish innovative solutions to meeting some of these goals. So at the bottom, you can see geothermal produces firm, flexible power. It can operate flexibly, which we don't often do, but that's a really critical aspect of what geothermal power can provide. It can also provide long duration energy storage on the terawatt scale, which we don't talk about that often either. But this is, I think, a really interesting and new area that my office is trying to work in and develop with the community. Another piece, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I can't understate the value and the importance of how geothermal heating and cooling, both on a heat pump and community thermal energy network scale, can actually balance the grid. This is really critically important from the perspective of just load shaping and the efficiency of these technologies to help reduce peak load across different environments. And then lastly, a prolific lithium resource, the Salton Sea in California alone, and this is just in the US. Internationally, there are incredible resources from the critical materials perspective, but California resource alone can provide 375 million batteries for electric vehicles. We all know there are defense purposes for lithium as well, and these resources can be found around the world. So geothermal has a solution to a lot of the challenges we're facing today in the energy sector, and we're really excited to be a part of it. So the way that GTO is thinking about our portfolio right now is in the context of the grid is power, heating and cooling, and storage. And you all know what the implications and probably what all these technologies are. But basically, it comes down to the utilization of heat from the subsurface, whether it's for the purposes of power, turning a turbine, whether it's for the purposes of heating and cooling your home, or actually using the subsurface as a battery. So from the power side, we are working in 4 technology spaces: hydrothermal, enhanced geothermal systems, closed loop, and Superhot. We consider everything to the right of hydrothermal as a next generation resource, which we apologize in advance for all the confusing terminology in the geothermal sector if you're new to this space, but there's a lot of new and exciting work happening and new technologies that are coming onto the scene every day. So next generation is a really helpful bucket. But alone in the United States, I'm going to focus my remarks on the US, but we have a very significant opportunity resource space. Domestic resources exceed 5 terawatts, but our analysis, and one of the authors of the analysis of our recent liftoff report is in the room, Mike O'Connor. But so we're looking at 40 to 125 gigawatts of firm power, depending on the scenarios, if you're considering decarbonization scenarios or not. But a massive domestic resource and a massive opportunity for electricity demand that could come from geothermal power. I think it's important in the context of this discussion and what you heard this morning, and I think later today we'll hear, that the amount of the resource that is developed in the United States and globally is completely dependent on the techno-economics of the resources. And so that's, in our opinion at DOE, where the innovation comes into play, and why the role of the startups that are here and the developers that are here to actually test in the field, and our role in the Department of Energy to provide support is really important. From the heating and cooling perspective, again, I don't want to take too much of your time on this, but again, the opportunity to reduce peak grid demand is really critical. And what that translates to in the United States is a significant reduction demand of 13% by 2050, and avoided need for a very significant amount of transmission. So thinking about the costs of building out 700 to 900 gigawatts for rising demand, if we can save some of that energy for other purposes, save the need to build out transmission just by using more efficient technologies, we think that's a really big win. And then on the storage side, we're focusing on the opportunity to leverage the diurnal and seasonal capabilities of the subsurface for storage. And we're working on some interesting concepts with the national labs and some universities for not only just industrial heat, providing industrial heat, but also the opportunity to utilize basically thermal energy storage for cold fluid for cooling data centers, which is a kind of new concept that hasn't been tested, but something that we think has a lot of potential and a really interesting overlap with variable renewables. So I think that everyone is probably aware, many of the folks that are working in the startup space here are the ones leading the charge in this space, but and those of you in the finance community, but the investments in geothermal are rising dramatically, and I think because of the fact that this community and this technology space can offer the benefits that I've just talked about, this heating and cooling, the flexibility of power generation, and energy storage, which again is quite unique. Since 2003, in 2004, investments tripled, and then this is from Wood Mackenzie. In Q1 of 2025, there's 85% of 24's entire annual allocation was already met. So this is a really amazing change in the geothermal sector from the time that I've been in it, which is the last 15 years. And many of the organizations here, the startups that you see and companies have been doing a phenomenal job of raising awareness of the opportunities for next generation geothermal. And some of these are funded partners from Department of Energy. So you can see again on the right, this is the trajectory from IEA on cumulative investments. And obviously it sort of just looks like a really big peak moving forward. But it's still a very small sector, and so the investment and the innovation that we can help put into this sector from the sort of public non-dilutive capital standpoint that we do at Department of Energy and from the investment community is extremely important in the U.S. and overseas as well. So market potential is rising dramatically. This is another figure from the amazing IEA report, and I'm really excited that this report is out there and has raised global awareness the way that it has. So I think that what we are looking towards, again, back to that earlier slide, is at least in the United States to help reach this potential by trying to develop at least 90 gigawatts of power in the United States. And then from the heating and cooling standpoint, our another liftoff report that we've worked on, basically an analysis on where the sector could go, indicates that we could see around 36 million the homes by 2050, which is the equivalent of around $700 billion of investment. And the technical potential for that resource is much higher than those numbers. But so what's really critically important is maintaining that investment in innovation and helping the industry get out into the field and test technologies and develop new ones. And that's sort of the highest level, the crux of what we do at DOE. So first, the opportunity to access firm, flexible power and to help promote and educate the public on heating and cooling, demonstrate the capabilities of large-scale storage. And this is where most of our funding that's appropriated by Congress is spent. We spend much of our time driving innovation, learning by doing in the field and in the lab. Also with the goal, of course, of reducing costs and ultimately trying to develop and to deploy advanced technologies and workflows. And I want to underscore that because I think the importance of, and we were just talking about this with Isabelle, the idea of new technologies is critically important, but also just advancing workflows and being more thoughtful in how you're utilizing existing technologies in a more thoughtful or efficient way can be critical as well. And we're doing quite a bit of that within DOE. The other piece is, consistent, abundant, and public objective analysis. That's a big part of what we do. We're really excited to have partners in this space that are publishing amazing reports on where this sector can go. And of course, for the industry, for decision makers, and for the global community. And then lastly, partnerships with utilities, with other governments, with companies, with other government agencies to spur growth and to help advance this sector. So one starting advantage that I think is worth mentioning here is within the United States at least, is that we have a massive community of folks in the oil and gas industry that are around 300,000 or more potentially, again, a figure from our liftoff report, that have the capabilities to help advance the massive sector growth that we would like to see here. We have an incredible community already, and many of those folks have come from that industry. So that subsurface expertise that's really unique in the United States is a starting advantage to help us meet some of these goals. So I will quickly move through just that as I've already mentioned, kind of the technology spaces we work on. I'm gonna focus on the power side and give you a quick couple of highlights and just tell me when it's time for me to go. So because I could talk about all of these initiatives all day, but this is from our next generation R&D portfolio. Utah Forge, I'll talk about as it's our largest funding initiative. And Milo, thanks for the really nice words on that. It was probably the highlight of my career, was helping to stand up Forge, and it's been really incredibly exciting to see the developments and the breakthroughs that they've made in the EGS space, and hopefully supporting the other parts of the conventional and closed loop and Superhot industries as well. I'll talk about our pilot demonstrations program, the Geode initiative, which is a really clunky acronym for we're collaborating with oil and gas to try to advance the geothermal sector, bring the communities together, and then Wellbore construction, because I think it's the unsung hero of the cost reduction, thank you, cost reduction roadmap for geothermal. So really quickly on Forge, because I am definitely out of time, is just that this is where the majority of our, as I said, our budget is spent innovation in the field. The Forge effort is a collective field environment where we're de-risking together with the community to try to advance the enhanced geothermal system space, and iterating on technologies at a systems level down to the component level. So we've been able to demonstrate a lot of really exciting successes there. We've drilled 8 wells, but the first wells that were ever drilled nearly horizontal were drilled at for geothermal, were drilled here. We've been able to do the first behind casing and cemented essentially stimulation. And the drilling rates, I think, are the really exciting piece of what we've done at Forge with respect to just advancing drilling to the point where it is, we've been able to demonstrate that you can make drilling cheaper by drilling much faster and by implementing workflows, not necessarily new technology. So I think this is a real important point, that there's a lot of headroom with advanced technologies for how much further we can go. If this is just if we've been able to essentially increase our drilling speeds from 15 feet an hour to over 200 feet an hour just by being more efficient and thoughtful in our drilling, what can we do with advanced technologies? So lots of really exciting accomplishments here, but I think the main point is that there's a really clear path to continued improvements in learning rates, because we're already seeing the startup community and industry take these learnings, apply them, and do better, and reducing costs by over half in the field. So this is really big game changer. Our pilot project program is sort of a smaller scale version. It's not a field laboratory like Forge. These are actual demonstrations that are meant to demonstrate and show how how a different EGS or closed loop concepts might be able to work in the field. We've started with 3. Mazama is focused on Superhot, and the other 2 are focused on conventional enhanced geothermal systems. One of them is right next door to our Forge project, the Fervo's effort. So we're collaborating with Fervo right next door in Utah. The Mazama project is working on the flanks of Newberry volcano, and Chevron is going to be working in Nevada and each of them are using different technologies to demonstrate how we can basically create a reservoir in the subsurface. The majority of them are thinking about horizontal wells, and apply new technologies and new even drilling methodologies to the EGS challenge. I won't spend too much time on Geode, except just to say that we have a really exciting collaboration with the oil and gas industry and many different partners to help advance not just barriers to expansion and the workforce challenges that we see in trying to expand the geothermal sector globally, but also how can we leverage assets? What can we do with oil and gas wells? What can we do with any sort of oil and gas technologies to transfer over? And then how can we manage the potential legal and sort of red tape challenges of what are we doing with transitioning oil and gas leases, for example, to geothermal. So there's an opportunity to work together on this, and we're developing some roadmaps with this really large consortium that are hopefully going to turn into funding opportunities to work with the community. I think, as I said, wellbore construction is a really critical piece of lowering the costs of development of geothermal, and we worked with some partners at the labs to develop a roadmap in this space, and this is the product, a funding opportunity that is focused on how can we make well construction lower cost and more sustainable? How will we be able to predict when wells might be getting towards the end of their life, and make sure that we can improve well performance in general. So a number of projects that I don't have time to go into, but just to say that we're leveraging expertise at the labs and in industry, the service companies, and universities to try to do something exciting to be able to better understand what's happening in the subsurface. And then finally, my last slide, I promise, is just focusing on, again, another project looking at how we can reduce drilling time and costs. And this is our first partnership with Occidental Petroleum, where they've just drilled 20,000-foot wells in the Denver Jules Basin in Colorado. It's pretty incredible and exciting. They might be the deepest geothermal wells in the US at this point. and with the Geysers Power Company, who's been a long-standing leader in geothermal, but has now deployed some of the technologies and methodologies that we used at Forge to continuously demonstrate that you can show success in drilling through hard rock with PDC bits and drill much faster and for lower cost. So I will leave it there. Thank you so much for the time and the opportunity to talk about what we're doing at DOE, and happy to chat with all of you later.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Director Boyd, for that keynote. Next up, we have an exciting panel on the next gen for geothermal frontiers, the so-called Superhot rock or supercritical resources. It's a real all-star team, including government agencies, corporates, and NGOs. I'd like to welcome Jenna Hill from Clean Air Task Force, Isabelle Chambefort from the New Zealand Institute for Earth Sciences, Robert Mellors from the Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy. I always just say ARPA. Sorry, it doesn't roll off the tongue. ARPA-E, rather. And then last but certainly not least, Matt Houde from Quaise Energy. Looking for Matt. Oh, there you are. Please give a round of applause for the next panel.
Everybody want to sit? No, I can sit here. That's fine.
Thanks, Lauren. That was great. And it was really great to see the other speakers and panels, and I'm very excited about the new report from Carnegie. I'm just really happy about the movement in the space. It's a really exciting time to be thinking about geothermal. So, I get to my slides. One second. Well, I can get started here with introductions at least. So, my name is Jenna Hill. I work for Clean Air Task Force. We are a technology-forward NGO focused on catalyzing solutions to climate change. And I work as an innovation manager at Clean Air Task Force, specifically on our Superhot rock geothermal team, so focused on geothermal innovation. So how do we push the boundary of what's possible for geothermal today? So that's Clean Air Task Force. And our program, our geothermal program at Clean Air Task Force, Clean Air Task Force focuses on a series of technology areas. And in order for a program to be a focus at Clean Air Task Force, it has to be something that we feel is particularly transformative for the climate and energy system. So Superhot rock meets this criteria. We focus on not just conventional geothermal, but the innovation side of geothermal for a very specific reason. Something like 0.1% of the heat beneath our feet right now could provide for humanity's energy needs for something like the next 2 million years. And that heat is continually regenerating, whether or not it's used as a resource. So when we think about geothermal, we take a step back and we think, okay, what kind of technologies or what kind of innovation can maximize the potential of this resource? And the answer to that, it kind of comes in two ways. One is geography, and the next is energy density. So to put Superhot rock into context with the other kind of wonderful technology pieces that we've talked about today, geothermal can be split basically into three major heat extraction techniques. One is conventional geothermal. It's a great resource where it exists, but it is geographically rare. And then we have the next generation geothermal umbrella, EGS closed loop systems that were on the previous panel that work by either circulating fluid through fractured systems, EGS, or circulating fluid through closed loop systems, AGS or closed loop. So those are heat extraction techniques. And I think something when we're thinking about this is important to think about or understand is these technologies aren't just popping up out of the blue. There have been over 60 EGS projects that have occurred over the past 50 years. This is a report that my colleague Jason Lipton put out recently. And the technology is improving thanks to the projects that are happening, like Lauren was describing at the GTO. Temperatures on average for EGS wells are over 50 degrees higher than 20 years ago. Average measured depth is more than 2 times project averages from the 70s. Flows are increasing, costs are decreasing. And so that's when we get to Superhot. So where does Superhot rock fit into the picture? It's not the heat extraction technique. What we're thinking about now is the resource. So when we refer to Superhot rock, we're referring to temperatures, geothermal at temperatures above 374 degrees Celsius. And the reason why we focus on that at CATF is because we see a significant step change in energy density when we go from below that temperature threshold to above that temperature threshold. But it's also important to think about the wonderful ecosystem of uses for geothermal. And when we expand the envelope, or we open the envelope of what's possible for geothermal, temperature-wise, we're also expanding this runway. So now we're, in addition to high-density power production, we're also talking about industrial decarbonization uses, district heating uses, agricultural uses. So just expanding this runway of what's already possible and really important uses of geothermal. So what's exciting in the space is there are also ongoing projects that are happening in Superhot rock. We have the Mazama project in the US. We have the Japan Supercritical project happening in Japan. We have the Iceland Deep Drilling project, which is in its kind of 3rd phase of planning, and they're hoping, if everything goes well, to be demonstrating power production by 2028. And we have the project in New Zealand as well. This is Isabelle's project. So as you can see from this slide, this work, because this is relatively low maturity, this is an inherently global effort. We're working with the IEA Geothermal to put together a task group to make sure that these projects are able to communicate, and that's also what this panel is about. The last thing I'll say is this is a model that came out of effective altruism a few years ago. It shows energy consumption globally. And when it comes to clean energy, we do have a lot to do. I think we can all agree. But I know geothermal is up to that task. But our work in geothermal at the end of the day cannot be moderate. And that's what this is about. And that's why I'm so inspired by the projects that are represented here. So with that, I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So first, Rob.
Yeah, so I'm Rob Mellors. I'm a program director at ARPA-E, which I think Milo explained what it stands for. And it's a branch of the Department of Energy that's really focused on identifying high potential, high risk projects. And so we try to be complementary to other agencies like GTO, that we take on things that are in the realm, but maybe past the envelope of mostly of what they cover. So we try to be complementary in that area. And so, for example, we're funding projects all across the map: quantum computing, fusion. And in the area of subsurface, for example, we're looking at Superhot geothermal. We have a program that's halfway through. Well, no, it's in process of being awarded. We had a call in January, and we're working on getting the results out there. And that's really focused on well construction, well materials. We're hoping to do things like computational material science to try to leapfrog to generate new cements, new casings, and other materials like that. And then we're also working on geologic hydrogen. So if you have any really wacky ideas or innovative ones, come catch me in the reception. I'll do what I can. Thank you.
So we'll go to Matt.
Thanks, Jenna. I'm Matt Houde. I'm a co-founder and chief of staff at Quaise Energy. We founded Quaise 7 years ago in 2018 with the mission of unlocking a path to terawatt scale geothermal. Terawatts being the scale at which our energy system operates today and the scale at which the oil and gas industry operates. The way we viewed the path to get there is to go hotter, which means going to super hot, because these are at temperatures where we can produce power at the energy densities and cost that fossil fuels currently provide, and to unlock that power density at scale by going much deeper. Where we can do super hot projects today, or where the nascent super hot projects are in the locations where geothermal is already favorable, and we can get to those temperatures at the same depths we drill for other resources. And so to unlock the true potential of Superhot, we wanted to pursue a technology advancement that can allow us to go much deeper. And to do that, we're commercializing a drilling technology that was conceived by the MIT Plasma Science Fusion Center about 15 years ago using nuclear fusion technologies repurposed for heating and ablating rock rather than mechanical drill bits. The way this technology works, or would be conceived in practice, is that we start at the surface with conventional drilling technologies because we don't need to reinvent the wheel there. When we get to a depth and temperature where conventional drilling is slowing down due to declines in rate of penetration, as well as increased non-productive time to replace damaged drill bits or other damaged equipment that exposed to the high temperatures, we take everything out of the hole and introduce our drill string, which is actually a metallic pipe we call waveguide. We generate high-powered microwaves at the surface with a device called a gyrotron, again, built for nuclear fusion, and transmit that energy down our pipe with a purge gas that we are injecting. Jenna, if you wouldn't mind showing the video here. What we're doing is using that microwave energy to rapidly heat the rock and ablate it through a mix of spallation, melting, and even rock vaporization. So, the concept seems science fiction, but as you can see in the video, this is actually science, and the physical processes underlying this drilling are similar to everyone in this room because we're heating rock the same way you use microwaves to heat food in your microwave oven. The drilling you see done here was done about a year ago in our lab testing center in Houston, Texas. You can see we're drilling a few inches of rock, and where we are today is using that same system, but now being deployed into an actual field trial of the millimeter wave drilling at a granite quarry in Central Texas. We are very excited to make progress towards our initial depth milestone at this site, which is 100 meters this summer. I expect to be making a pretty exciting announcement about that in the next month or two. And over the next 2 years, we plan to advance that depth milestone to 1 kilometer while we begin to build a full-scale millimeter wave drilling system that can drill both with conventional technologies as well as with the millimeter wave drilling approach to mobilize to our first geothermal project. And that's really the second prong of what we're doing at Quaise. We have secured quite a few sites in the western US whereby we can access super hot temperatures at relatively shallow depths of, say, 3 to 5 kilometers. In the coming years here, we plan to develop those projects, initially leveraging conventional drilling technologies because we can access temperatures at those depths with conventional technologies. But this project serving as the perfect landing spot for deploying our millimeter wave drilling technology in 2027, 2028, when we believe it'll be fully mature for full-scale geothermal drilling demonstrations.
Thanks, Matt. Let's go to Isabelle.
Kia ora. My name is Isabelle Chambefort. I am the Energy Future theme leader for Earth Science New Zealand. That was previously GNS Science, which is a New Zealand government public research organization. I have a background in geothermal science for the last 15 years now, something like that. And I have the privilege to be the scientific advisor to the New Zealand Supercritical drilling, new phase of drilling exploration for New Zealand. This project is really a legacy of more than 60 years of New Zealand geothermal development. New Zealand is, if you're looking New Zealand in the report, it's not there, is because we never had the need for developing EGS. We have exceptional conventional resources, hydrothermal resources, a lot of water and a lot of heat at shallow depths. So it's been really carried on for a long time. New Zealand generates 20% of the electricity, 22 actually now, of the electricity using geothermal. So we're not known for a lot of things, New Zealand, but geothermal is definitely one of those things. This supercritical project is following 6 years of exploration, massive geophysical inversion and modeling, understanding where magma sit in the crust. And that led to a decision in last November of the New Zealand government, for the first time in 40 years, decided to ring fence $60 million to fund the first deep well in New Zealand. So we are catching up on the race for supercritical. We are right now in the process of designing the technical team and having the well design, hoping to have drilling started probably by the end of 2026. Our potential is really to, in the first hand, to look at accessing, flowing, so hydrothermal convecting supercritical water, and slowly understanding what is the recharge rate. And due to the large amount of heat that is in the North Island of New Zealand, it's moving towards where we may not have permeability, and we may have to apply some technique from EGS to hydrothermal. And I see that like the realm of Superhot geothermal is really a pathway between how we're going to learn from hydrothermal to how we get to be able to apply it worldwide EGS as Superhot condition. But in New Zealand, we're going to start by utilizing our amazing resources first. So
That's really exciting. Thank you. So I think what I would love to start talking about is kind of what you just mentioned and also what Matt was talking about. So for both of you, I think my first question is that with the exciting things you're working on, this doesn't need to be technical. It could be just, it could have to do with just setting up and planning your project as well. But what have any lessons emerged from either of your projects that are useful? I'll start with you, Isabelle.
Oh, with me. Listen, really important. I'm a geologist, so I'm going to praise for my field, but really important to have the most accurate geological record, even if it's at a regional scale, because to be able to identify target, which is a needle in a haystack of where you're going to have your best well, you actually need to have really, really good geological background. It's been really easy to know where we're going to have starting to have a selection criteria or where are the best targets in New Zealand for that. And I'm talking with Icelandic people or in Japan, we all came to the same conclusion. The other important thing as well is, which has been a fundamental thing that happened in New Zealand, is converting the science into an economic potential. So knowing, all geologists will know that there is heat underneath a volcano, not a problem. Making it in a language that investor can see the value and how we reach the government decision with a lot of cabinet paper and a lot of meetings, but it was really to put it in a language. So it's not just about the science, it's also putting this in a language where there is actually a value. And that's for me has been, and for New Zealand, I think that has been an absolute game changer in the way we are communicating. And another thing that has been absolutely incredible is because New Zealand is a small country. I mean, we don't have the population that you have, and we have very limited electricity needs. We're already 90% renewable, so it's that we can really cut, like our growth is really dependent on our demand. But one of the key things that was fundamental is getting the absolute leverage for the whole geothermal sector. So because we have a government decision, the data, and it is to be for the benefit of the whole sector. And seeing this excitement has been really important, and it's been absolutely fundamental to get this decision and then continuing advancing and at fast pace.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of other regions could learn from, especially if they want to be serious about developing the geothermal resources that they do have. Matt?
Yeah, I think largely going to be re-emphasizing some of Isabelle's points here, especially on the importance of showing the commercial economic value of what you're doing, even in these early demonstration projects. I think as a startup in our early years, we were very focused on the technology development in the lab. And as we get not only to this stage of the capital we're raising, but also the requirements of the capital we need to do a demonstration in the field, it requires a lot of upfront capital that people aren't necessarily willing to provide upfront unless you can show that there's going to be a return coming in the near term, here in the coming years, and it's not just kind of spinning your wheels, making technological advances, so to speak. And so I think it is important to think in not just the technology, but the commercial roadmap, that those things intersect together such that you maybe modify your initial technology roadmap so that you can get to that commercial readiness at an earlier date and show that timeline to potential investors who are then more willing to provide the upfront capital to do the capital-intensive things required in a geothermal project, such as simply drilling the initial exploration wells. Definitely the point on understanding what's happening underneath the subsurface, and I think a need to really characterize as much as possible, and not just the geology, but also the performance of your sensors you're using to understand your drilling, your completion, your reservoir creation. It's really important to extract as much information as we can in these early demonstration projects so we can refine our conceptual understanding of how superhot rock reservoirs behave. I think a final point I'll note that's definitely we've taken account of in the recent months is just the importance of getting out into the field as soon as we can. The lab testing is very important, but I think in geology there's maybe an analogy to be made with the observer effect in physics, which is that sometimes when you're taking a measurement, you are disturbing how things are actually going to be happening in practice. So while the lab testing and information you gain from that is incredibly valuable, it's not necessarily a true reflection of how things are going to happen into the field. So I think it's very important to get out into these field environments, into these super hot conditions as soon as we can, so we can truly calibrate how drilling will operate or how fluids and rocks are going to behave in super hot temperatures in that true field environment.
That's helpful. And I think on that same topic, and this is a question I think any of you, I'd love to hear an answer from any of you, in terms of facilities for testing materials prior to bringing them into the field, are there any, do you have the facilities that you need, or what kind of things are useful? I know you mentioned yesterday in our discussion a geothermal process simulator that's been useful. What kind of things do you find would be useful for kind of de-risking early? And I'm also curious, from the ARPA-E perspective as well.
Sure. So I've been wrestling with that question quite a bit because part of our call was actually funding facilities and validation of materials. And the question, there's amazing number of people in the US and elsewhere who are experts in cement. And, they listen to what we ask. I mean, one question is specifications, because you have the geothermal people here and you have the cement material science people over here. And material science people are like, oh, that's easy, what are the specifications? And the geothermal people are like, well, it depends. And then we almost had a fist fight, I think, at one of these workshops on what exact material properties you wanted for cement. And so that was kind of key, but it's how do you validate it? So someone has a piece of cement in some lab somewhere, and we want to say, okay, is it going to last for 15 years, the length of a power payment agreement, for example? And how do you do that? I mean, okay, the obvious way is you stick it in a vat of geothermal fluid and let it sit for 15 years, but that's probably not really feasible. And so questions like that, that's why we need these lab facilities. And so I don't really know that much about lab facilities. So we had all these people come in with stuff, and it's like, well, I don't really know what's needed. I don't even know what this thing does. And now we're trying to decide how to fund things. So I'm kind of glad we have a bit of a pause. We can sort that out. But that is a real need. And so you don't want to spend $10, $15 million on something and get 2 measurements at the end of 3 years. Well, that's I think it's absolutely key. But also the personnel. You don't want to fund, give somebody a bunch of money for 3 years, and then after that it gets put off in a closet and mothballed somewhere. And you need the staff as well to take care of it. So it's not a simple question, and it's absolutely key, these facilities, to see that not just the casing, but also what the rocks are doing. I think you spoke yesterday about the brittle ductile transition, and so it's not only is hot, there's high pressure, there's unknown chemistry, and then you've got supercritical water maybe going through it. And nobody really knows what that does, as far as I can tell. There's lots of people who say they can model it, but are the models right? I don't know. So that's my take. I don't know if that helped, but yeah.
Can I jump on that?
Yeah.
Just to build on what you were saying. So there's two type of labs developing right now. There's the labs that do geomechanics at high temperature and high pressure. Probably the best one. One is in Lausanne, one is in Japan. And they are mainly based on geomechanics with very few geochemistry associated with. In our lab at Earth Science New Zealand, because of the limitation, we decided for years to focus mainly on the geochemistry, which is lacking, and it's one of the strengths of New Zealand geothermal industry, or the sector has been the geochemistry that everyone use have been developed in those countries like Iceland and New Zealand. So we're just building on this legacy, and so investing. The next step, I think, of laboratory is combining this experimental geochemistry lab where you can simulate any type of material in flow condition. So you can test any fluid against any material, but you don't have a geomechanic. And the other, you have the geomechanic, but you don't have necessarily the permeability into it, or very limited in terms of chemistry. And the next step, and I was talking with other lab, is really how we're going to integrate everything, because you don't have geomechanic lab are generally not very clean. And geochemistry lab are generally, you need very clean experiments set up. So it's a combination of the two that's really gonna change that. That deserve, as you said, long-time commitment to develop some of this lab. And I mean, it's fantastic to see some of those laboratory very specific. I mean, the fact that we can now simulate up to 700 degrees, any fluid, well, not too corrosive if there is HF, we don't put it in a titanium tubing, but any fluid, any material in the casing, any cement in those conditions, you can also deform. It's giving us a massive boost of confidence of what we're going to find when we finally drill and be able to sample the fluid and the rock at those depths. The next step is really to combine the two. And that's for me it's the golden goose of the laboratory. I would love to see that somewhere.
And I think you want the numerical part going in parallel.
Oh,
you can do that.
100%.
That's the other-
You
the
need
other
to be
part,
able to
yeah.
simulate that. So the numerical simulation is growing in the space. So there was a lot of advancement done in. So there's two schools: the people coming from the heat from the magma, the people coming from the geothermal, like the Berkeley lab have been developing, like TUF2 and things like that. The next step is to integrate the data, the chemistry, the basic chemistry and thermodynamic data at those supercritical conditions, and incorporate that with the chemistry and the geomechanic. So that's really heavy computing science that need the validation of experiment. And that's really, but that will happen at the same time when we have test field, and which is very exciting. I mean, I am very excited. Maybe not everyone, but I am.
It is exciting, yeah. So,
And then you have Matt putting microwaves into it.
Yeah.
And what
A little more
happens then?
unique.
And I at this, I don't know what it's going to do with chemistry, to be honest. Just
Trying to find that out too.
Yeah.
that's helpful to know. Yeah, so my next question, Rob, is about your program specifically, and your vision. So I'm curious about when you think about your program in the next 2 to 3 years, what does success look like specifically for the Superhot program?
I'd like to have an innovative new casing that survives any temperature, is lightweight, and cheap to make. I don't know if it's realistic, but that's what we're aiming for, really. I mean, something different than geothermal is always following oil and gas, and oil and gas has put tens of billions, maybe probably more, into well and casing. But when you get past 200 or 250, you're in a different regime. And we were talking yesterday about rig weight and hook load and all that. Well, you need lightweight casing. You need to be able to fabricate it, and that's another thing. We have material scientists. First, they're going to run a computational, and then they're going to make a little coupon of material about this big that's going to be the perfect material. Well, we need more than that. We need 3 kilometers of casing, and so that's another aspect. It'd be a casing that's thermal resistant, and then the cement. I think all these are solvable, but it's the cost is the big problem. I mean, if you had enough money, I think you could, you'd make the well out of Inconel, you'd have gallium nitride-based electronics and some kind of cement, and it would work great, but, it would cost $150 million. And you're probably not going to get $150 million of electricity out of it, I think. So.
Right. And I'd love to hear about, I'd love to jump to kind of the collaboration piece of this, because to me this feels like something that's really important. I'll start with you, Rob, and then I have a more general question for the rest. But I'm curious how ARPA-E is coordinating or would be helpful to coordinate with other US or international agencies on Superhot rock. We've been hearing some interesting stuff about international work in Iceland and Japan, New Zealand, but also the Compass project that was funded by the EU. There's some interesting stuff happening internationally, so I'm curious, either with other US agencies or international agencies, I'm curious how collaboration might be useful.
Yeah, other agencies, especially in DOE, you try to talk to them and figure that. But for international, really falls in kind of two realms. There's kind of the top level, where I go somewhere and we sit in a room and we sign an MOU and then maybe we have some nice hors d'oeuvres, and then I come back, and then maybe something happens, maybe doesn't. And then the other way is a more organic level. So we can have, if we fund a project, the partners can be overseas. They cannot be a prime, so it has to be a U.S. organization leading, but they can have other organizations overseas do part of the work. And that's to me, that's a much more organic, from the ground up type cooperation that can be very valuable, because often those build on, people have known each other for years, maybe they're in graduate school together, and it's a very often successful collaboration. There's a couple constraints. We try not to duplicate. If work can be done in the US, it's hard to make the case for someone, but in geothermal, it makes it easy because you've got Iceland, you've got New Zealand, and the others that we really don't have all that ability here. But I think that's the best way, is kind of at the ground level, kind of going up. And of course, if I have to go somewhere like Japan or New Zealand and sign something, I'm willing to do it if you twist my arm. So,
You're always welcome.
yeah.
So for Matt or Isabelle, who have been some useful collaborators in your current projects, maybe outside of your current company or organization?
I can start there because I just want to sell Rob's agency here. When we founded Quaise in 2018, it was my co-founder, myself, Carlos Araki. We had $1 million angel investment to start the company. And then there was a $5 million funding cooperative agreement coming through from ARPA-E to fund the next stage of high-power lab testing. So I think ARPA-E saw the proposal we had in mind for millimeter wave drilling, the vision that this can unlock geothermal at a greater scale and greater depths in what we can do today, and made a bet on us in a sense in terms of funding the next stage of lab experiments that were required to really advance the technology beyond what had been initially achieved by the MIT Plasma Science Fusion Center, where the technology was conceived. So I would say ARPA-E has absolutely been an instrumental partner to Quaise in getting us to where we are today, not just in maturing the research and understanding we have of the drilling process or the finer details of the technology, but also in our fundraising efforts to build a team and a facility to be able to go to investors and show that we had a source of public non-dilutive funding that could handle this early stage research aspect, while we could commit other funds towards things like building an engineering team that can build our own capabilities to advance millimeter wave drilling. I think that ARPA-E support was very instrumental.
Thank you. And I guess a key thing there is the structure of ARPA-E, because we have specialists from all over. So if I get a concept paper on wave drilling with gyrotrons, which I know nothing about, I can go next door and say, Bob, does this make sense? And he's an MIT fusion physicist, and he can read it and say, thumbs up, thumbs down, or maybe. So that's a useful, as opposed to some ideas that maybe don't make as much sense that we get as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very different, the collaboration type that we have. And when, New Zealand, Iceland, Japan, and part of the US, I'd say the Western part mostly. We've been collaborating and exchanging ideas for 50 years. The development in Iceland have been triggering some interest, obviously, in New Zealand, also in Japan. There was no need really because there was no electricity demand to really drastically increase. So the reduction of our emission a little bit, then the increase in our, that trigger the need for supercritical in New Zealand, which is really answering actually a proper society need, which is great. Collaboration has been intensified, I would say, in the last 5-6 years via the project I was leading that's called Geothermal the Next Generation, that was looking at the feasibility of supercritical for New Zealand. So by advisory groups. So knowing actually what has been happening, collaborating with Carnegie Energy, with the University of Iceland, with IEST, NATO, JOCMEC, that led with some testing. So they, for example, we did some work testing some casing material in our supercritical reactor for GERD, for Japan. So some exchange work like that, very specific. We do have a high level as well, some MOU with few agency, I think including yours, that I agree, there's a lot of signature and a lot of canapes, but it's actually the reality is done by the people on the ground that do things. So that's why, I mean, for one of the reasons I came here, it's actually very important to be visible, to be part of the conversation, because you always learn about what is the next event. From that, we're building. But knowing the next step, what is going to be happening, we are leveraging right now the A team. We want to focus on New Zealand talent first, because we also want to grow our sector, which I think we all can understand. But this A team is going to include some direct collaboration with people designing the IDDP3 well in Iceland, people working on the next supercritical drilling in Japan, to leverage all of this knowledge that happened in the past. We're not going to restart at designing a well like it was done 20 years ago in Iceland. Or maybe we will learn not what to do. Like, like just like there was a few mistakes along the way, so we're going to try to not do that. But that's really important in that space. One of the challenge so we are really pro international collaboration, and we talked about that yesterday, about how, because it is so the next generation, but very promising in terms of energy efficiency and output, what it could deliver forward. Right now, we are at a place where we really need to, if we want to progress rapidly, we really need to have a mechanism to enhance this collaboration. Mm-hmm. And that's why, it's interesting to see why Iceland, New Zealand, and Japan are so well placed in that space. It's because we already have the knowledge of those high temperature. It doesn't need to come from oil and gas. The geothermal development happened at the same stage than the oil and gas generation. So we have a lot of knowledge of how to handle those high temperature. Some of this knowledge were passed from oil and gas in the 1950s, for sure, but it's also we need to start where we already know how to drill some high temperature. And what I'm saying, New Zealand system, for people who don't know, we're already operating at 300. The maximum temperature reached is around 350. So we are not that far from supercritical condition. So it's done routinely. Every year we drill at those temperature without problem. So that's really this legacy of that we are building on between all of us countries. Yeah.
And did you say yesterday that you had a 40 megawatt well? Or Several, right?
Yeah, I know. You're drooling a little bit. Yeah. That's why. Lev yesterday made the comment, and it was like, oh, New Zealand is unique. Yeah, New Zealand is. So compared to Iceland, which is probably most known from all of you as the geothermal powerhouse, because of they are really innovative and they're quite open to collaborations. Very different system. New Zealand is a little bit more secret. We're also further away, but yes, one of the most recent power station that opened in 2023 is one of several of their well is reaching 40 megawatt per well. So it's not that we need supercritical may not necessary. That's why EGS is not right now the key priority for New Zealand, because we really don't need it, and we can drastically increase the geothermal tech. This said, there's other limitations of special, like we don't want, for example, the environmental restriction is really important in New Zealand. The geothermal, we talked this morning about the geothermal policy and regulation. Geothermal is under the Resource Management Act, that is water in New Zealand. It's not under mineral, it's not under oil and gas. So it's a very different framework. So the water intake, geothermal is dependent on your water and the environmental restriction that you have. So that's all of this type of consideration that need to be taken. And the reason is because, when you have 40 megawatts, that means there's a lot of water, hot water flowing down there. But it's like if you could operate Yellowstone, that's the same thing, right? It's the same size of heat output that we have. So it is, but it's the best from my point of view, and there's no Icelandic here, so I can say that. It's one of the best natural laboratory where we can test really at shallow depths to reach those conditions. And to test in a place where you don't have necessarily the basalt, like we were talking yesterday around like the challenge of the brittle ductile transition. So it's a little bit more complicated. But that means we will be able to reach, but we are thinking reaching Superhot at 4.5 kilometers. It's not deep. Considering we're drilling right now, maximum it's 3.6, the deepest well. So that's quite down to this. And it's going to be, if we can keep it open, it's going to be a tremendous well for any scientist worldwide to come and test, for any tech, for any startup, anyone to come and test it. And it's honestly, if it's in Iceland, if it's in Japan, it doesn't really matter. As I was saying yesterday, we really need a success, and we need to be able to do this. And New Zealand is really, really keen to be the first.
Yeah, I think, this loops into what Matt was saying. Bringing these into the field to actually be able to test in the field and prove out in the field is incredibly important. I'll have one more question, then I'll hop. We're getting some good Q&A questions as well. So my last question is for all of you. Really, just fast forwarding a little bit. What needs to happen for Superhot Rock to scale beyond the first few projects, and are we building the right foundation now, do you believe, for rapid growth when the tech does prove out?
I think we're getting there, but we can definitely, move faster. There's certainly a need for, funding these, not just funding these demonstration projects, putting the money in there, but I think getting people excited in especially the oil and gas industry and where the potential off-takers are going to lie. So I think especially oil and gas industry, if we talk about scaling geothermal at these gigawatt scale deployments per year, they have to be involved in some capacity because they know how to build energy developments at this scale and speed. And I think Superhot's the way to go to bring them into the fold because they can look at geothermal and point to this and say, that well looks more like an oil and gas well I make today, not like the geothermal well I've thought about in yesteryear. So I think it's incredibly important to get the oil and gas industry involved and excited about Superhot. I think off-takers as well, the classic candidates like utilities, industrials. There's now, sort of the new ones like the AI hyperscalers who are really driving, accelerating demand. I would also say even areas like the Department of Defense who have a strong need for baseload, power-dense power. I think that we absolutely need to gain their involvement, not just, again, in being able to provide the commercial pull for Superhot development that can accelerate some of these demonstrations, but I think also helping us get a sense for how we not just think about what's going on below ground, but how do we build things at the surface that they are ready to say, we can mobilize surface-scaled Superhot power plants at the gigawatt scale, build and retrain a workforce that can operate these power plants at the scale that we operate fossil-fired thermal power plants today at the same temperature range. I'll just note kind of one final thing I think we need to do is really shift the narrative and perception of geothermal. I like to say as a redheaded stepchild, geothermal is kind of the redheaded stepchild of energy, underappreciated, but enormous potential. I think we need to sell that geothermal, especially going super hot, this is something that looks far more like fusion in terms of its potential. And I think a key difference there is with technology innovation, this could be 5 years away instead of 50 years.
And so I guess to me it's scaling, economies of scale in the technology. For example, the high temperature electronics. And right now you can go somewhere and someone will build a bespoke temp board that will go up to, say, 400 and last for a while, and that's certainly possible. I can think of a number of companies or universities that can do that. But what you really want is someone who's building a mud motor. You just pick up the catalog of 400-degree circuits, pick that one, and order it and have it come out. So you need that kind of ecosystem already there, because if you build one, how many are you going to sell in the next year? And so maybe we have to branch out to other industries like nuclear, because nuclear has some of the similar, high pressure, high temperature. So maybe look for technologies that are common, and so you can get some of these things like high temperature electronics built, and so it's just so much easier. It doesn't take a research project, and that would go for, say, a mud motor. I mean, you could probably build a high temperature mud motor tomorrow if you wanted to, but how many are you going to sell in the next 5 years? Are you going to recover the costs of your engineers? And so I think that's something then, that's a chicken and egg problem to some degree.
Just very quickly, for me, that just like, as I was saying, is we need a success. And the reason is, doesn't matter, is that success will give us some guarantee of what fluid we can have, and that will give us some information on what type of fluid you're going to have by reacting or by re-injecting or stimulating the well at EGS level, because you will have some chemical condition that will be similar at when you're re-injecting water in those conditions. So that's not lost. And so you can also use this information to convert that to a product. Right now, what we are in, in technology readiness level 4, 5, 6, something like that. So we really need to, and that's why collaboration and the grasping of the international knowledge in that space is really important. If we get a success, that means we're going to have the ability to test and that will inform your well design for moving into DPGS. That will inform your well design of how we can implement your horizontal well and stimulation technology using the casing that was designed for Superhot, for hydrothermal, how we're going to be moving forward. But that means that some of this information needs to be share. So there's an IP challenge there. That's where actually leveraging government money has been really important. So we actually can communicate about the finding that. I welcome any private funding to also, come. But it's the reality is that breaking everything. The reality is that don't invite a New Zealander. It's going to break the stage. But we absolutely need. I think for me, I want to see a success. We can actually refine our economic potential, and then seeing for once and for all, can we actually do this? Yesterday was said in because we had a little round table about Superhot. Actually, what we're trying to do is a lot easier than what the oil and gas industry did by going deep ocean. Deep extraction and 3 kilometers of water, extracting your fine sediment hull, and it's a lot easier to do what we're trying to do. It's what the difference is. The geothermal sector doesn't have the R&D cash that the oil and gas sector had, and so right now we just need a success to really make a business case, if you want, to attract some of this R&D potential. So that's for me my what we need to see.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So you mentioned IP, and this is related to this is the first question we have on here, actually. It's a difficult one, but I think it's really important, especially if we're talking about collaboration, and especially if we're talking about private companies, oil and gas, startups, et cetera. But the question, and this is for any of you, what kind of IP rules or data sharing rules you think would be necessary to make collaboration on Superhot rock attractive to private companies?
Good question. I think there's definitely a need to be open and sharing collaborative on, especially this geologic data and data on how fluids behave and how rock behaves at these conditions. I think that needs to be more widely, openly shared, and I think that's something private companies can get on board with to really just, again, improve our understanding of how geothermal reservoirs, EGS reservoirs, wells will behave in these conditions. I think there probably needs to be carve-outs for especially companies providing technologies here, that there are certain things they are able to protect in a sense that are their, what brings value into the company, And it's not just a matter of what tools are being deployed, but there's a lot in sort of the space of, I guess you'd call it trade secrets. You know, the analogy would be the recipe to make Coke. Coca-Cola doesn't have a patent on making Coke, but they sure have a recipe that's kept literally under lock and key, and some people have access to knowing it. And so I think companies do need to be able to protect that recipe portion of what they're doing in a project to be able to participate in a more openly collaborative development.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, so, I mean, for startups, yeah, the IP is almost the golden egg, so you don't want to give it away. But I think it's interesting, I mean, in geologic hydrogen, for example, I can think of one company doesn't tell anybody anything, but there's another company that is publicly shared. They're actually an Australian company and they're publicly shared, so they're forced to release. And I tend to favor the open, but you know, I could be wrong. So, but I don't think we can change the IP landscape. I don't know.
Especially international IP, that's going to be the challenge. I mean, so the idea that we had around in New Zealand is how we're going to be able to attract is, because New Zealand is a small country, we don't have a lot of technological innovation companies or things like that. So, but we're trying. I mean, you know,
I mean, if you have government funding, you can put restrictions.
So government funding is and that's why it was so important to succeed. Like it was so important to manage to get the backup from the New Zealand government. So that sends such a strong signal, right? Worldwide, obviously. But the idea of this New Zealand government is actually not, so right now this project is led by them, but we're going to have a special vehicle purposes, which is kind of a company that is where the government will have some share of it, but there is also the possibility for any private sector or research organization to come into the special vehicle purposes and under a consortium, if you want, where you have a shared knowledge and a particular period of embargo, so you have access to the data for a period of time. You bring in the IP you're bringing in will always be your IP. There's not a question. We're not going to buy IP from you, but that's really by coming together, but protecting as well the knowledge and the IP that is generated during the drilling, that is generating during the utilization. That is for the benefit of New Zealand company, obviously, and it's for the benefit of some of the scientists as well. I will work on that, so you know, not everyone can go. And it's actually, but it's also for the benefit of any private company that want to go. This is just the start of a new phase of exploration for New Zealand. The plan is to have at least 3 exploration wells. And so we need this. We have been thinking right at the beginning about this. How are we going to manage IP? How are we going to manage investment? How are we going to manage, you know, protection of the New Zealand sector? And it's because it is quite a fine balance, to be honest.
I think Forge is an excellent example where open data really sparked the industry. And so I'd have to thank GTO and Lauren and the GDR. I mean, I think that's really a major reason why Fervo put theirs, because of the open data.
Yeah. And that's why the first well is fully funded by the government. So the first well, the data will be released regardless. It's the other one that needs to be, you know, we can work on a financial mechanism for it, hopefully. Really to leverage co-creation of IP. I would say, like, it is such an opportunity to develop IP together as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And Rob, you mentioned the GDR. I wanted to just explain it for folks who don't know. That's the Geothermal Data Repository that's hosted by the DOE. So the previous panel spoke a little bit about how capital costs are a major barrier for geothermal, especially next generation geothermal projects. And this is obviously going to be higher when you're going deeper, going to higher temperatures. So this next question is about what kind of steps would maybe be most helpful for mitigating risk for private lenders or private investors, really just around de-risking. What kind of things are useful for de-risking for that early stage?
I think there's a big need in the context of EGS that there's a lot of large pools of capital that aren't yet ready to jump into EGS. And I think a big reason for that is they aren't confident in the long-term power generation potential from the reservoir, because there just simply hasn't been the time for these projects to produce energy from these reservoirs on the context of years, where now a bank can say, I'm willing to make you a loan at a very competitive interest rate to finance via debt construction of a larger power plant or an expansion of a well field. And so I do think there's a need for capital, whether it's from the private sector, venture capital, or from the government sector, to jump in at this earlier, riskier stage for these initial wells, not just to finance that drilling, the completion, the reservoir creation, but the long-term production from these reservoirs, to kind of show that the energy production potential is matching what's been modeled going forward. So I do think that's a challenge to de-risk with the upfront capital.
And scalability, you have to demonstrate that it's scalable out to big. I mean, some ways after watching startups, I think the financial problems are harder than technical problems. In some ways. It's watching various startups that we fund, and they kind of trying to take the next step, and it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, the scalability is clearly one of those things. One of the key challenge as well is, which is a little bit different from Forge or what the GTO have been doing, is that if you're going to do a test well in a field that's already operating, where does the liability and the risk of during the drilling and the risk of the asset? Because a geothermal well is not, oh, we're drilling a well and then we're closing it down. Is that what? So there was a lot of conversation. We have a lot of conversation around what's happening with the geothermal well after, and having this a discussion around where the liability and where the risk sat from government to passing on to the private sector has been really, really an interesting conversation, to be honest. The best way for us to de-risk the financial and the interest, basically the risk perspective, has been to have the government taking that liability, to take that financial risk for instead of a sector. Like, you know, all the progress that were made by the GTO. If it was not, that would have been really hard from the private sector to take that risk. Favor will not be where it is right now, for example, in drilling and having the first like EGS really power scaled without Forge. So it's leveraging on this first opportunity. I think government has been, and it's not, Iceland is the same, Japan is the same, you know, Mexico was the same. We're still leveraging the exploration that happened in the 50s and 60s in New Zealand. Like all the new fields that are expanding right now, it's still due to the exploration that was done by the government at that time.
I think that speaks to the long-term payout of exploration.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that payoff to our government as well, because, you know, they have royalty from that, so it's not negligible. Yeah.
So we have another question I think is really interesting about data for informing siting for test beds and pilots. So the question is, how can the international community enable countries to unlock better geological data to inform siting for test beds and for super hot rock development, both kind of in the short and long term?
I mean, again, it falls in the government. I'm thinking of Saudi Arabia, where data is held often very tightly, and so if they had more open data policies, that might or might not help. I mean, I kind of cast aspersions on MOUs, but MOUs are useful as an umbrella, and it covers. I mean, some other countries, if I send them an email from a U.S. government address, they won't respond unless there's some sort of government MOU in place. But the data doesn't exist, or it's just not accessible. And I guess would be my take, having worked overseas. It's really difficult to get the data, if it exists,
And that would be extremely dependent on your regulatory and your planning regime. So take the example of Iceland. Most of the data are public, or they are administrated by ISOR, which is the kind of a central geological place. In New Zealand, the regional, because we are able to leverage on the geological monitoring, I would say monitoring, volcanic monitoring, seismic monitoring. There's a lot of that in New Zealand. So we have been able to leverage on those data sets that were created not for resource purposes, but they exist. And so converting that was quite easy. But the data, the geothermal data, so the well chemistry, the flow, the reservoir simulation, all of that, they are in the private sector because they are under the Resource Management Act and they're not under the oil and gas or mining policy. So if you want to go in New Zealand and you want to do mining exploration or you want to go oil and gas exploration, you can have access to the data prior to 5 years. If you want to do geothermal exploration, you have no chance of getting any data from reservoir or field, and it's just purely based on the legislation. What we're trying to change right now, New Zealand is going to launch so it's launching at the end of this month in July, and then the official, I think the glossy paper is going to be by the end of the year. We have a new geothermal strategy coming in place. That was initiated because of the supercritical and things like that. But this, as part of a strategy, it's not wood, but I'm hoping. It is proposed that the geothermal will pass into an open database to facilitate international and national investment. Because right now, what has been happening is that the people that have a foot in the knowledge, that have a foot in the geothermal industry, have an absolute lobbying on developing the geothermal field of New Zealand. It's really hard, and it's really hard as well for people in New Zealand, like indigenous population that own the land trust, that are owner. They do not have necessary access to this knowledge, to this data. So by making it as much as possible, at least a series of data available, even if it's like oil and gas, there's a 5-year embargo or something like that, that will be drastic. Because right now, if you're taking a field like Waikiki that has been operating in 1958, you cannot have any of those data without an agreement from the generator. And I mean, I do not have access to this data. Like, I need to request that. So I'll have a consent or an agreement with them, and they can just simply say no. Or you can use the data, and then when you're saying the result, it's just no, we don't want you to be public. So it is a big impairment. So having the geological, at least the geological data set, the geophysical data set, I'm not saying just the flow and there's some limitation, but some of this data made available, but it's entirely dependent on the resource management and how geothermal is actually regulated in every country. And there will be some countries it's easier than others.
So that's very helpful, and I'm going to just ask one more question because we're up on time, and that is, what do you see as kind of why do you care about Superhot rock? Why is this important? Just kind of rapid fire from each of you. Why is this important? Why do you care about it? Why do you spend your time on it? Really?
I think it's really cool. I mean, you think about, especially for us, like when I first got engaged and was introduced to the idea of millimeter wave drilling, my mind immediately goes to Star Trek or Star Wars and just like, how is that even, like a plausible thing? And then I got to meet Paul Waskoff, the innovator at MIT, who came up with this idea, and more got to grasp how this was a real thing we can do. And I think there's, it's a tremendous amount of technological risk. I don't think we can shortchange that. But if we're successful in making super hot geothermal work, and then in the future scaling that by going to greater depths where now we can do these projects outside of the amazing places we do in geothermal today, like New Zealand, I just think, it's such an enormous potential to address many of our challenges.
And I think it's what Lev said about energy density. The hotter you go, the better it is. And deeper. So it's just, if we can make it work, it will make a difference. Right?
It's kind of hard to follow that, but I'm going to be selfish and just like thinking about it for me personally. I've been working for more than 30 years into looking at what's happening between magma and the surface, coming from ore deposit mining and then geothermal. And I always thought about utilizing volcanic environment for society. Those volcanic environments are incredible. That's where generation and humanity has been evolving and utilizing those resources. We have a mandate to try to find as much solution as we can to help in transitioning for fossil fuel. And yes, Superhot is going to be hard, but the It's really a golden goose at the end. Like it's really, like the potential, the energy that you can get from the supercritical fluid is ridiculously better than anything you can simulate in an EGS at 150 degree. So if we can crack down, I think that will be a drastic change for the geothermal sector, and I can't wait to follow that revolution for geothermal.
Great. Well, thanks to you all. This has been a really helpful panel. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the fascinating overview on Next Gen. Just a recap and some other updates. We have our final panel, bringing this back to right now, back to policy. We have leading diplomats from the EU, Kenya, Indonesia, and Germany to speak with Project Innerspace on Drew Nelson about what's happening right now in geothermal policy. It's a really exciting, dynamic group, and so exciting the microphone is ruffling. This all to say, please enjoy a little coffee break, get some carbs, come right back in. We'll finish up, and then we'll have cocktails for you and virtual reality geothermal headsets. Thank you all.
Is that a break?
This is a break. Yes. Yeah, they're coming. Really? Lauren?